just never have.
Probably should have had that on. I now call this committee of the whole of the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. Our first item is going to be a data presentation on math. I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you very much. Tonight we have, yes, sir. Tonight we have a couple of guests with us to present this data, along with Lisa Stevenson, our Director of Learning Results. We have Mike Wells, who is the math specialist for the Davenport Community School District. So thank you guys for coming to walk us through our data presentation today. We should probably do the pledge. Let's do it.
Hang on one second before we get started. We'll have everybody stand and we'll do the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Go ahead.
All right, we're here. Brenda, if you'll advance to the next slide, please. Oh, ouch. Okay, so there we go. Tonight you'll be hearing another data presentation, very similar to the one that we had last week or the week before, about our literacy results from Fall Fast and as well as our spring ISSA, but this time we're focusing on math. And so there had been a request from a board member to do a math update or math data presentation. So this cow is in response to that, but I would like to note that math isn't one of our priority areas right now, but you're going to hear as we go through the presentation that our data will suggest that we need to definitely be thinking about our plan for math because there are some proficiency percentages that are not where we want them to be, as well as some disproportionality. And so as you look at slide 2, that's kind of our standard slide there. Reminder, you all went through the training with IASB that those are some questions that you might want to think about as Mike and I are presenting that may help you frame your notice and wonder responses too. And then on slide 3, we have 2 similar outcomes. Once again, just reminding and reviewing that our data presentations are a part of our continuous improvement process, and then we're going to actually dig in and examine our current reality of our most recent administrations of math assessments. Slide 4 is answering the why. And so we know for you as board members, as well as when the teachers do this in the buildings, when we dig into math data, we want to remind ourselves of the why. And math, as well as literacy, is very connected to our mission and vision. It's a critical piece to helping us prepare all of our students to be able to compete in our global society. Thank you. And then when you have your private reasoning time and we're reviewing the data and sharing it out, we want you to keep in mind these 3 norms. What can the data tell us? What can we control? And how can we continue to take collective responsibility for the whole child? And all means all is, of course, referring to our subgroups and possible disproportionality that you might see. On slide 6, you see the graphic that represents our continuous improvement process that we use with all of our data digs that we're doing across the district. And here for math, we are definitely in part 1 or stage 1. This is our current state, and we will be verifying it with our most recent math data, and then we'll be looking to see if there are gaps. And that leads us into slide 7, which is our current state. And math whiz, Mr. Wells over here, is going to walk you through the charts and tables.
Hey everybody, glad to be here tonight. So the first
slide that we're going to start with is our fall data. And it's going to be tracking over 3 years. And we've broken it into two different systems, really, our elementary system and then our junior high system, as you can see by the graphs. I do want to point out on the 1st through 6th grade, one, we don't test our kindergartners at the current state. We do have the plan going forward to revamp that and start testing some of our kindergartners, especially in the spring, to get that data to move into 1st grade. To help with our MTSS program and really look at the whole child there. And then 2, on the 1st through 6th grade chart as well, I do want to point out that 2021 does not have any data results. The reason for that is we took the state guidance to alleviate testing on students, and since math is not a state test that's mandated, you'll see there's no results for 1st through 6th grade from last year. So you do see that 7th through 8th grade does have that data. They chose to continue with that data, and that guidance was more for the 1st through 6th grade or kindergarten through 6th grade last year. But this is a good trend data for the system in a sense for the buildings. So what we can see here is on the left side of our fall data from 1920 to 21-22. 1st through 6th grade as a whole went from 59.4% proficient to 55.1% proficient. On the right side, the 7th through 8th grade, so our junior high system, has a little bit different of a result, but we can guess what would have happened in 2021 for the 1st and 6th grade, but we just don't have that data. So in the 7th or 8th grade, we have a 52.4% proficiency in 1920. We have a bump there to a 53.9% in 2021, and then we have a decline down to 45.7 in 21-22. And we'll just let you sit here for a second and look at this data. This is a very big picture, and we will break it down here in a second, but this is good systemized data for the whole system of elementary as a whole, and then junior high as a whole as well. And again, this is just our fall data. One thing I should have said is that they do offer 2 different tests for math. There's an early math and an A math. We are currently only reporting A math at this point, and we're only doing A math. Part of that plan to go forward where we implement kindergarten testing will be to do early math, which gives us a little bit more broken down data, I'll say, by domains, much like you'll see here later with the ISSA, that we can use more for our system for our kindergarten and 1st grade, and then continue with A math going forward for 2nd through 6th grade, and including 7th and 8th. So that's just part of our plan, our continuous plan for fall and spring and winter FAST data. If we go to the next slide, this one takes apart that whole system and goes by the grade level now. I do again want to repeat that, remember in 2021 we did not assess our 1st through 6th graders because of state guidance. So you'll see that that red bar is missing for 1st through 6th grade. But this data helps us trend a little bit to see how the system is going. We can look at 2 different ways. I like to look at the blue line and then the yellow line to see if they are mirroring each other. So for example, they do kind of mirror each other where we rise, 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 fall, 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 rise, fall, fall. And that just shows that the system of what we have going on here is trending the same way year to year. So it's not necessarily a group of kids that's doing phenomenal that's throwing off the system here. It's showing the same trend between those 2 years, which are, again, 1920 and 21-22. It's also very good data to look at trends between the system as well. So if you look at 8th grade, we notice that every year since 1920, we've declined. And it is to be pointed out that that yellow line, 21-22, is the year after COVID, right? So there's some implications here that I don't want to lead you to, but there are definitely some implications that we can make based on that data there. So again, I'll just let this one sit for a second. We do have some more in-depth data for fall that we're going to look at in a little bit later for some private reasoning time, but this is a good way of seeing what this looks like as a whole. Okay, we're going to move on. So again, this is all of our fast fall data. We're going to transition into our 2021 ISSA data. And this is that state mandate test that now goes from 3rd through 11th grade. So we do miss that window of 1st and 2nd graders that we were just watching. But now we get to look at our 3rd through 11th graders. So we get to include our high schoolers in this test. The red is our not proficient or not yet proficient. The green is our proficient. And then the advanced is that blue all the way to the right, which would be our advanced. So again, this is another different type of test here. This one does break it down more into the domains and the clusters. I'd be happy to read them all to you if you'd like. They do change through grade bands. So 3rd through 5th grade is a set of 5 domains. 6th through 7th grade is a set of domains. 8th grade is its own domain, set of 5. And then 9th through 11th is a different set of domains. And that's all just progressing with the child as the domains of math change based on the level of math. So as we get to the high school, we get domains like algebra, geometry, probability statistics. And in the younger ages, we're talking about number-based 10 and that kind of information that there's really building those skills there. So this is just, again, the holistic view of the grade level and how we did according to ISSA.
Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, we are in the very beginning stages of math. You've seen a pretty well-developed and approved our literacy plan and our plan for behavior with CRVP and PBIS. And math is much in a much earlier stage than either one of those. And so we just recently had our first 2 groups pull together and look at that data. We had what we call our AROD group, which is a group of stakeholders that dug into all the data and subgroups, and then came up with notice and wonders, very similar to what you all will do here in a minute. And then a week or 2 later, we brought it back, that same process with our DSAT, which is building administrators and other district level representatives, to try to get some ideas about 2 and 3. So what are some possible strengths in math for our students at Davenport within our math curriculum? Our teachers' knowledge about teaching math, what are some things that we do well here? And then what are some barriers? What are things that are getting in the way of our kids performing at higher levels and subgroups performing without disproportionality? And so the next step would be to create a plan, but we're not quite there yet. We still need to hear from a lot more stakeholders. For example, our teachers, our math teachers, and all of our district principals who've not all had a chance to weigh in on this yet. And then we will most likely partner again with our AEA, because they really helped and had a beautiful process we did over the summer with literacy and PBIS to look at this entire continuous improvement process with our data. And so in January or February, we will, actually I think it's late January, we'll take fast math again. And so we'll layer that most recent data in, bring this group together with some math experts and start thinking about, what can we do yet this second semester or summer? Because we really want to keep our eye on the literacy and PBIS process, but know that math is a continuous reporting area for our Iowa school performance profiles. On the next slide, you will see, similar to last time, that there are data tables linked, and I believe you have those, right? Yes, thank you. The math data tables, if you open that spreadsheet that looks at our 1st through 8th graders and their A math data, and it breaks it down by subgroups. So as a reminder, you are looking at in tab 1% proficient, and then you have 4 years of historical data to look back at with that one gap year of COVID figured in there. And you look at this data not by just all, the all subgroup, which is what Mike shared with you the last few slides, but you'll also get to see any subgroup areas where we had a high enough N count to be reported to the state, including the subgroups of Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, multiracial, 2 or more races. White, IEP would be our students who are in special education. ELL is our students who qualify for English language learner services, and low SES is our students who live in poverty. And then on the second tab, I hope you have this printed out too, maybe. The math group dove right in and started making formulas and figuring all this out for you and color coding the apples to apples look. So that's what some of you as board members do, that every time we put data in front of you, you look and say, oh, how did this first graders do when they took it 3 years later in 4th grade? So you'll be able to see there whenever possible whether there was a gain or a loss in percent proficient among those subgroups. The second thing on, or link on that slide 11 is the ISSA math data tables, and I will dig into that one when we get to that part, because if you remember last time, we're going to just focus on FAST to begin with. We're going to give you 5 minutes to do some private reasoning. There's, sorry, Brenda, I'm in slide 12. But focusing on the 2 questions about what do you notice when you look at the data, what can you say to be true, and then what do you wonder, what questions still linger for you? And that can be related to our all proficiency, grade level data, or subgroup data. And there's a little, slide 12, one more. There's a little timer with an arrow in slide 12 that if you click on the arrow, it should start a 5-minute timer. And if you want to take that time to look at your FAST data and put down any notice or wonders, because then we'll just popcorn around when we're done, and you'll have an opportunity to use that system of I notice, I wonder when you when it's your turn to speak. Thank you, Brenda. Any questions? She started the timer, but I want to make sure. Nope, they're already looking at their data. Great.
This is the biggest hurdle.
put it together, and then you guys see the total of 2 weeks. Probably 10 hours at a time, but it's because each building, different site, you know, like, well, we're looking at that next Wednesday. Oh, we're looking at it 2 Wednesdays from now. So that's kind of where it takes so long. But then each one will have grades is broken down there too. Well, sometimes we do, but they're doing their like implementation PBIS stuff. You know, and they plan that out. And then the teachers get more things to plan and everything. So it takes time more to coordinate. We could do that. We could try and get it in the future. Yeah, this is like we did all the budget commission. Just done on the 25th. Everybody dug in. Probably all of the bills. So I was just checking the signature. Yeah, we're getting a lot of. They came up with some good stuff. It does. They're wondering. Yeah. See, in the past, you're not ready. You know what I mean? So in this cycle right now, you guys are because we're just now getting through the conditions of learning. Transitional adolescence. It's kind of like we should be ready to you to say data and what we're doing. So
Beep, beep. That's your timer. It's over. It doesn't pick up the sound, but let's go ahead and take volunteers, and then we'll just circle around. Our director goes, I'm sorry, would you like to call on the directors to share their notice and wonder? Thanks.
All right.
And just one other thing, we are taking notes and recording these because with each different stakeholder group, we have a way of like extracting their data so we can put that all together and see, well, that was a theme amongst many groups that was noticed. So with that, Mike's typing
Okay.
what you
Director
say.
Snyder.
In all grade levels that we're looking at here between first and eighth, all but seventh grade, students with IEPs have the lowest proficiency in 21 and 22.
Director Hayes.
I was looking at that as well, and with this, they started off hiring the third grade at 31%, and by the time they get to 11th grade,
That one's haunted.
by the time they get to 11th grade, all the way down to 5.5%. Another thing that I noticed that in the all categories, everyone was pretty much down. So I know, just really disturbing numbers to see that disproportionality across the board.
Director Klein Jerome.
I have a lot of things down here. First of all, this does look like the early literacy scores, and it is disturbing to see these math scores. The junior high and the high school, though, are not focused on early literacy. So my question is, why are we not looking at least at those two groups, the secondary groups, and getting something in place by second semester? Because we can't wait a whole year. It's kind of like the concern about math or reading. We can't wait. We need to move. And I realize you've already put a lot on the plate of elementary people, but the junior high and high school do not have that same focus. And they're departmentalized. So you're not focusing it on everybody. So I would like to see a push by at least second semester. I I also know, like, when you're teaching, kids were at home and hybrid and online, parents can read to kids. Parents can't always teach them this math. This curriculum is not what they learned. I know, having taught it, the parents will say, I don't understand this. Not that they don't understand math, they just don't understand the way we're teaching it. And I don't know how to address that, but, you know, there's a disconnect, so you aren't going to get the same support possibly from home because they don't understand how this curriculum works. I also wonder about the Amath scores. And again, in the past, they were tested on things that were not covered in our curriculum. Has that been changed so that we are addressing things? Because our curriculum didn't match what Amath was testing them on. So of course they wouldn't know that. How would they, you know, we hadn't touched on it. So I just wondered if we'd gone through and made sure that they are connected.
Director Potts.
I think stating the obvious is that we now know that online learning as an effective tool for everybody is not an effective tool. I mean, that's patently obvious. It would be interesting if we could compare our scores to some like school district that didn't shut down and see if there's some sort of difference in the data. But it's across the board. A year not in the classroom causes a loss of achievement when you take these standardized tests. Have we had any feedback from the teachers to know that there may have been a loss of retention on standardized testing, but in classroom performance on what's being specifically taught, is there a higher level of mastery?
Director Poston.
Well, first, I have a question as far as proficiency. You know, what defines proficiency? I mean, say for a third grader, sixth grader, eighth grader, what do they need to know to be, or what are they expected to know to be a proficient in math?
Can we answer all? He's taking notes. Can we answer them all at the end?
Okay.
Okay.
And then just the other thing, it seems like for all students, proficiency starts tapering off more when you get to seventh, eighth grade. I don't know what changes there. If it's a curriculum change, are we going to Algebra 1 to geometry, or you know what's going on there? And then also the obvious difference in scores between African American and white, that kind of glares at you in every category or every grade.
Director Beck.
So I only looked at the Amath, but and basically a lot of what's been said I noticed as well. I did notice, kind of piggybacking on what Director Poston just said, students seem to be doing better in second and third grade, and then it drops off consistently through eighth grade. Fifth grade is particularly low, no matter what year, pre or post-pandemic. Those are sort of generalized. The disproportionality is striking and disturbing, and none of the scores are particularly high. No one's at 75%, which is unfortunate, to say the least. And I share Director Klein-Jerome's sense of urgency that, you know, we've got to fix this as well. which kind of made me wonder, how do the literacy scores of our students track with their math scores? Because there's math which requires you to understand numbers and how to manipulate numbers, but there's also a significant amount of math that requires you to read, especially in those later grades. And so I'd be interested to know how those two things track together.
I guess it's my turn. I agree with what all of the other directors said. I'm assuming that this is the raw data, and obviously you all will break data down by the buildings and then come up with game plans for each building on correcting some of this stuff. You can definitely tell there was a lot of lost learning from the online environment. And like Director Klein Jerome had said, I have 3 kids in the district, and they definitely don't do, and I'm not that old, but they don't do math the way I did when I was in school. Now, I've asked for years and years since I've been on this board. I don't know why we don't have YouTube videos on how to do those problems, because kids will watch YouTube videos to learn how to play a game, do everything else. So I would assume they would watch those to learn how to do that, or even a parent. I mean, I've tried Googling some of that stuff just to help my kids out with some of it. So I don't know why we don't jump on and do that. I've asked about it for years and years, and I feel it falls on deaf ears, but that could be something to help out, and then parents can help at home as well, because obviously the teachers only get the students in the classroom for so much time, and you got to cover a lot of things, and some support has to come from home as well. I know we all send our kids to school to learn, but it has to be a partnership as well with the families to kind of help out with some of that stuff as well. Director Potts.
Tell me if I would be correct here, because I'm trying to track cohort groups. So, first grade, 18-19. All students 58.8% proficient. That group would be the second grade 19-20, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and their proficiency was 62.8. Then in third grade, they'd be the 20-21. That's a flush. And then in the eighth grade, then they would be in fourth grade, they'd be the 21-22 at 52% proficient.
Correct.
I don't know, so that if you want to track the grade through. Now, is the N used in those all students in that grade, or those students that were Davenport students for the majority of the instructional year? Because we have a pretty shifting population.
So did everyone get a chance to do notice and wonder? Do you want us to answer the questions now that we noted? Or we can answer on at this time?
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Okay. So most recent question you just asked for the fall FAST data, that would be our students that are here. We're here this September in person in our 1st through 8th grade classrooms on our Chromebooks taking that assessment. Yes. And then the ISSA data that we're going to talk about in a minute, those also were our students who took this assessment in April, early May, in person here for math.
So to piggyback a little bit off that, the data we're looking at is all of our students for the 4th grade kiddos that we talked about and the 1st grade, whether they just came in that day to our district, or if they in 1st grade have left and we didn't track that. So the data is as close to apples as we could say, but it's all data, all kids.
Some of the wonders that you noted, parent support, that was wondering about how parents can support and how can we use technology like videos. That was a wonder that was brought up with both of the groups that we've reviewed thus far the information with. Did our curriculum change? Yes, in the sense that not the resource itself that was purchased, but the pacing or the alignment of when in the year or how many days are spent on that topic, I believe is edited every year, correct, Mike? Yeah. But there are some topics, whether it's geometry or data and measurement, that are taught or introduced in the spring, April and May for possibly the first time to students, and the test is given in April. So teachers, I assume, will bring that up when we go over this with the teachers too, because they want kids to have a chance to have all the standards and all the grade level curriculum before they take the state assessment. And I understand where that comes from. I just wonder, that impacts everyone the same across the district. So, North Scott, Bettendorf, they're all faced with the same window of time to take the assessment as our kids and the same days of instruction. So that evens the playing field, so to speak. That doesn't mean we shouldn't address it, but it is an issue that affects all of us. Can we compare our scores to school districts that didn't shut down? I'm not sure. Did you mean that didn't go hybrid, that kept their kids in school the whole time? I'm not positive, but we can check and see if anyone would be able to disaggregate data that way.
To me, that would just be a curious set of data to get, just to just to satisfy curiosity.
Do you want to answer what defines proficiency, Mike? So just like literacy for A math and A reading, they do have cut scores that determine whether they're proficient or not, just like that. So they based on the students' responses on the level test, if they get above a certain cut score, they're labeled as proficient. And that cut score fluctuates throughout the year depending on the grade level and what test we're taking. So like, for example, I just pulled up the cut scores that aren't on here, so I apologize. But in third grade, A math cut score is 204. In the winter, it's 207. And in the spring, it's 209 to show that progression of learning. Right. That's how FAST works. And then the spring ISASP is a 60% cut score. You have to be 60% proficient on all the items.
Just a follow up to that then, but can you tell me what they actually know in math? I mean, the score doesn't tell me anything, but what do like in third grade, what are they able to do? In fifth grade, what are they able to do?
Right. So for A math, it's just a screener. And so we don't get that data that we get to really dig into. That's part of the reason we propose to move to early math for kindergarten and first grade, because it will break it down into subgroups of the math data. But this is just a screener to give us that pulse of how the system is doing. So it doesn't really break down into that per kid, other than just saying this kid was proficient, this kid was not to that expectation, if that helps answer that question. The third grade, if you were a parent of a third grade student who took the ISASP, you would get a paper report that shows in those 5 domains of geometry, data and measurement, numbers and base 10. I can't remember the other 2 off the top of my head, but in those areas, your child answered 7 of the 10 questions correctly. And then those questions are ranked as depth of knowledge 1, 2, or 3. So how hard of a question, how challenging was the question for the child? And then they combine all of those, and all of those questions align with the Iowa Core third grade math standards. So off the top of my head, I can't think of a math standard in third grade, but possibly like child will read a multi-step word problem and use multiplication to solve, or use the correct operation to solve. So on their computer, a question pops up on ISASP that's a word problem, and then they have to read it and say, do I need to subtract, divide, add, multiply? They solve it, pick the right answer, move on to the next one. So on each of those grade level proficiencies, the standards that the teachers are teaching every day, all year long, and that they report out are the same standards that the set assessments are based on. So there should be an alignment between what our student standards-based assessments are showing on report cards, as well as FAST and ISASP. Yes.
Sort of to piggyback on that, what I noticed as a parent is that my child was doing things like algebra and geometry, but they weren't called algebra or geometry. They were kind of hidden into whatever it was that he was doing. And if I read the standards on, say, his report card or whatever, I could tell. I mean, it might mention geometry or algebra, but I just recognize them as that. So, but I didn't ever get a sense of, okay, at the end of third grade, kids are doing long division. I don't even know if they do long division anymore. You know, or at the end of second grade, they learn how to calculate change, you know, in cash. That kind of thing, I think, is maybe what Director Poston's asking about. And those are the kinds of skills that makes it plain to parents and to the community. Yes, our children can do these things, right? So, you know, not everybody's going to agree that being able to solve the square of a quadratic function is a super important life skill, but I think everybody might agree that being able to calculate in base 10 is important because then you can make change, right? So I guess that would be sort of something to think about when we're communicating these things.
The last couple that I think we could ask or answer that were wonders were, there was a comment made about the reading scores and literacy scores, and that is spot on. If you are a struggling reader, math is also going to be a struggle for you for most students, because the math that I think I can fairly say, maybe not for Mike, but if you learned math, you learned it with the more, you're looking at numbers, right? It's a list of problems to solve, calculation, arithmetic. And now the math that they're asking the students to solve is estimation, probability, reasoning. It's a much higher order level of math. And so what I hear you saying is that a wonder that we might have is how can we better educate our families and parents as to, like, this is what third grade math looks like for your student. These are the kinds of challenges that your student is going to be faced with every day, because I'm guessing probably that most people that haven't gone to elementary school in the last 10 or so years don't understand how challenging the math standards are right now and what we're asking kids to know and be able to do. The other thing that, will this be broken down by building? Yes. So when buildings go through this same process with teachers, they get to see this piece, but then they also have a separate Google folder or paper copies of their buildings data, so they can see how they compare to the district. All right. Yes, go ahead.
I think to help answer some of the questions, next time when you do a presentation, could you bring like a copy of the test that each grade takes, and we can kind of look through it, and then we know what they need to be proficient on and things like that. I think that would answer some of the questions that were asked, and I'd be curious to see.
Sure. There are links out there that we can share and teachers can share too that are sample tests for ISSA. We can do that. All right, so the last part of tonight's presentation was asking...
Hang on one second, Director Snyder.
Sure.
Sorry, I've got one other question.
Okay.
A couple times so far I've heard the process of looking at this data as new. I guess, is the initiative new? Is it the curriculum that's new? Is it the assessment that's new? I mean, what part of it is new? Because certainly the district has looked at math numbers in the past, so I'm not sure what is new.
Maybe if I'm the one that said new, I was probably referring to ISSA data, because we'd only administered it one time before. And teachers that have been here for a while are used to looking at Iowa assessment data or ITBS, where we could actually do an item analysis and look at what types of questions our kids were missing, what questions they were doing well on. So that is new. And then looking at ISASP is a summative annual assessment that the kids take in the spring, but that we also have this screener, FAST, which kind of tells us at 3 times during the year, hopefully predicts whether the kids are going to do well on the ISASP and who needs, who's in the red, yellow, and green, who do we need to focus our math interventions on. All right, so the last.
Hang on, Director Hayes had a question, and then
Okay.
Director Klein-Jerome.
I'm sorry, this,
No, you're
you
fine.
had mentioned the AMath, and what other choices were they, and why did you only select the AMath?
So Amath is part of the Fast Bridge Suite, which is a company that the Department of Education has contracts with that offers literacy and math screeners. And so that assessment is available to all Iowa school districts. The literacy is required and the math. And so we are able to benefit from that being available and accessible. And then all the data from that is stored in a system called Panorama that allows us to pull reports out and check our progress too.
All right, thank you.
So on this new testing for the Iowa, you cannot do item analysis, is that correct?
Well, maybe. I think without diving too deep into it, they've started to make more reports accessible to us when you go into the Pearson system. And so I don't know if it's down to the item level yet, but it's definitely better than it was the first time around because people were clamoring to know more about like specifically what our kids could do or not do.
And is that also a time test, or is it however much time? It's not
No,
timed
they can have
anymore?
as much time as they want.
Okay.
Yep. It reads it to them too if we turn that feature on for math.
Is there, and Director Beck had a question?
Just a clarification on that.
Sure.
Does it know how long they take to answer? Like, does that factor into the score?
It does not.
It
I mean,
does
they
not.
know how long it takes, but it doesn't impact their outcome.
It's not adaptive in terms of scoring, like if it takes you 5 minutes to answer a question versus a minute.
The ISSA, no.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Director Potts?
Two questions or comments. One, thank you. I'm not proficient on the microphone. And I hate to use the term the new math, but the current math, which you say is requiring estimation, probability, those sort of somewhat higher level thinking skills. Has that been assessed to see if it is developmentally appropriate for where second, third, fourth, fifth graders are in their mental capacity? Okay. You don't have to answer. You just want to think about that.
We'll put that in the wonders. Yeah. I think I know, but I don't want to misspeak.
I mean, I could speak to it just briefly. It is the state standards. It's the adopted state standards that everyone's adopted in the state. So they would have made those decisions based off of that data. I don't know if they've since implementing it have looked into that data, but they would have been a big trial beforehand to talk about adopting those for the state and for the nation.
My second would be our report cards in elementary school are standards based. So is there a correlation between the percent that are proficient on these, let's say on the FAST data, and students whose report cards say they're proficient or not proficient? My assumption is that it doesn't correlate. My assumption is that the report cards, they're proficient. Then when they take the assessment, they find themselves not proficient. And so my overarching question would be, what is the more accurate assessment of the students' standing in and assessing where they are academically? The assessment the classroom teacher is providing, or the assessment of the standardized test? The age-old question.
Right. And that was also brought up by the last two groups too, because our ongoing assessments that the teachers give weekly, monthly with each chapter were locally developed, I believe, based on the curriculum resource we were using. And so what we're seeing at many grade levels is that students who are performing what we would deem at proficient are not able to then be considered at proficient on these exams. It's almost like if your scale at home is different than your scale at the doctor's office, you can think you know what you are, but then there's an official scale that tells you differently. So that when we look at next steps, when we get to that piece, I think we really have to look at too about maybe taking some of that subjectivity out of, or objectivity, excuse me, out of the process, so that we, know day in and day out with our students if, when compared to others across the state or the nation, can they compete at those same rigorous levels? Because these summative assessments like ISSA will be, we'll expect them to, compete at those same levels. So that's a very good point. All right, if you, Brenda, wouldn't mind going down to slide 14 here. I think some of you reviewed the ISSA data with the FAST. Do you want us to do a second round of notice and wonder? Or, no? Okay, I didn't think so.
Seeing a lot of head shaking. there.
People, I think we're jumping around a little bit, so that's okay. And then if we go to slide 16, I just, in closing, basically, I appreciate all of your willingness to notice and wonder, because it just is another confirmation as we go through this with different stakeholder groups about how important the continuous improvement process is and what that data is telling us. We do know that our next steps are in development. We're hearing from you and others. This is a time-sensitive topic that we need to address, the area of mathematics and our students' performance. We did see disproportionality across the board, and we want to address that as well. We know that a content area like math that is so large, it's a large part of our students' day, similar to literacy, and has a big impact on our every student succeeds, our ISSA scores and our student school profiles. We want to make sure that we do this well. There's a lot of learning for teachers behind this, a lot of learning for parents. There are resources that need to be updated, but doing that takes some time. And so we plan to tackle this as soon as possible after we go ahead and get this same process replicated at the building level with our teachers, come back together as a group, look at this internally as a district, and then just devise some next steps. You'll hear back from us. I think we are scheduled to talk about this again in February, and we hope to have a solid plan to put in front of you at that time. And to the comments you were saying about secondary, I just wanted to remind you that at the last few board meetings, you approved the purchase of ALEX, which is a math intervention, math supplement that will hopefully help with our 7th and 8th graders and some of the data that you saw here. We have a plan for implementation of that, and teachers will be trained November 17th. So our students will be using that with fidelity moving forward. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Okay. Any other questions about math?
I have one question, and I don't think anyone asked that. What can we do as the board to help you all achieve this goal on getting these scores up?
I'll take that one. Well, first of all, thank you for asking that question. I think the best thing that we can do is continue to look at the data and continue to ask the questions, continue to be cyclical with the way that we review. I think it's pertinent to ask the questions that you guys have asked. We can't wait. What do we do now? Are we aligned? All of those things are now on our plate, and we're going to answer those questions and bring them back. So the thing that we need from the board is to continue to ask the questions about math data, about what we want to see the plan. We want to review the plan, because when you guys are ultimately our accountability force, and so that's the number one thing that we really need from our school board, is to expect that cadence, ask good questions, and then from there, are we implementing the plan? SWAT. I believe that's something that the board has been looking for, and that's exactly what we need to. So thank you for asking that question, by the way.
Are there any other questions from the board? Seeing none, thank you all very much, and I believe the next item is enrollment.
Yes. Lisa, are you going to stay and play in this party too? Thank you. We have Kevin. Kevin's going to come and drive our next presentation. Mrs. Hoffman, if you wouldn't mind joining us too, that would be great. So we put together a presentation. Our finance committee, as we're getting ready to create our line item budget, this is one of the first things that drives exactly what we're beginning to plan for. And so today we're going to look at open enrollment, certified budgets, special ed counts, things of that nature. But we wanted to bring some numbers to you and describe the financial impact to the school board. So the team that we have assembled today, Kim Hoffman, Kevin Posacani, and Lisa Stevenson, all have their hands in enrollment with us. So Kevin, go ahead. And if you guys have questions, answer them and raise your hand, and President Goza will help facilitate those questions all along the way.
I'll start on this. So TJ mentioned there's 4 areas we're going to focus on tonight. We're going to talk about the overall enrollment, what we commonly call our certified enrollment. We're going to talk about open enrollment and tuition out, the special ed enrollment count, and preschool count. So those are the 4 areas we're going to focus on. So when you look at slide number 2, this is our overall enrollment. Can you go? Oh, thank you. So you see the bold across the top that our enrollment went from 14,471 to 14,418.
Are you driving, Brendan? Will you put that in present mode?
Bottom right, the thing that looks like a little screen. It's to the left of the negative sign at the bottom. No, down at the bottom. Not that one. Yeah. There you go.
There you go.
Back up one, please.
So this is our actual enrollment. So the way this adds up, we're doing math today, all day. The 14,418 is where our current enrollment is. This is a snapshot in time of October 1 of this year. This enrollment drives next year's funding for our authorized budget. The sum of the numbers below equals the 14,418. So we're going to break this down a little bit. You can see that our actual enrollment went down 53 kids, if I did my math right. So one of the indicators is that our enrollment decline has slowed a bit. Even though our resident students went from 13,893 to 13,667, that's made up because of the resident public students attending another public school. That is open enrollment and staffed out students, and we'll talk about that 748 in another slide. There's some miscellaneous count for non-public shared time and some dual enrollment. If you go to the next slide, we'll start breaking down our count and our per pupil allocation. If you'll see if you remember, the state went 2.3% supplemental assistance for this current year that we're in. So our per pupil allocation went from 7,048 to 7,227. Just for reference, our per pupil allocation for our TLC comes into play. I won't talk about a lot tonight, but we receive the funds from the state based on a per pupil allocation, and when we get to enrollment out, we have to send that to the serving district. On these assumptions I made for FY23 on the bottom boxes, I just assumed for our purposes that we will get another 2.3% supplemental assistance. That is not what's going to happen. We have no idea. This is the one wild card that we are waiting for so we can start setting our budget for next year. Once we have those costs, the supplemental assistance, and we get our count totally certified by the state. I should mention, these are unofficial until the state has deemed that these are set in stone. So I just use an assumption of 2.3 for consistency between the years. So you'll see here in the bottom, there's some big numbers there, the 104 million, 106 million. That is just the per pupil allocation times the number of students. Budget guarantee, I know historically we've talked about budget guarantee. We are guaranteed to have 1% more than the prior year. They typically call it 101% budget guarantee. You'll see that in FY22, we had a larger decline in our enrollment. Therefore, we had $1.7 million of budget guarantee. This is part of why we have to cash reserve. This is property tax dollars to get to our total budget. And since we didn't have a huge decline, you'll see that for next year, based on that assumption, that our budget guarantee will be about $112,000. That's good overall. I'm going to stop there if there's any questions on this because I want to get into the open enrollment on the next.
Director Beck.
I'm going to ask the question that I think I already know the answer to, but I'm having trouble wrapping my head around it. Why do we get less budget guarantee when we have fewer students, but everything costs more?
Because they've increased the cost per pupil.
They limit it to 1%. It's because our enrollment did not go down much. So when you take, in this case, a 2.3%, that's what's driving this. We didn't lose a lot of students. So when you get 2.3%, you can still have the 101%. If you go above that because your enrollment went up or it was flat, that's fine. So if we had, for example, if we had 0 loss in students and we had 2.3%, we would have 2.3% more dollars. But when you have declining enrollment, the theory is when you decline, you're going to be able to reduce your expenditures. Things do cost more, but if you don't have as many students to serve, you might be able to reduce some FTEs across the board.
Okay.
On the next slide, this is a count that we've been working with Marty with. This is where our open enrollment out prior to the House file changing. We had 210 students that were attending these districts. I just want to give that to you for reference, and we'll come back to a conversation on this. I'm sure there'll be some questions, but that was just for information for you. You can see the spread of students. On the next slide, this is where we're going to get into the open enrollment and tuition out. That 748 is broken down between 737 open enrolled students and 11 tuitioned out students. Tuition out students could be staffed out students for special ed for services that we don't provide but another district does. It could be foster care placement. It could be court place students. There's not a lot of them, but they are part of our tuition out. So we will get the funds from the state, but they'll be passed on to the serving district. The one thing that's interesting here, you'll see the tuition paid per pupil looks like a mistake, but it's not. We pay tuition based on the prior year's per pupil allotment. So for this year, even though we're getting $7,227 per student, when we pay our tuition bills or when we bill for our tuition in, we'll bill at $7,048 a student. We'll also, the TLC money that I referenced before, that will also be added on top of that. So one of the things you'll see here in total that we will have an increase of open enrolled and tuition out expenditures of approximately $1.4 million. When we've been working with Gary on getting our working budget together, we will have that $5.4 million budgeted for. It'll go directly into that line. This won't be able to be spent on other things like staff salaries, those kind of things. So this is what drives our budget for tuition out. Questions on open enrollment? Okay. On the next slide, we're gonna flip to preschool enrollment. One of the things to keep in mind, first of all, when we count students, we get a FTE for students. Since preschool students are half day, we only get a half an FTE for our count that drives the revenue. So you'll see that we had about $150,000 of increase in revenue for FY23. One of the things that we did do this past year when our enrollment dipped is we used ESSER funds to maintain our staffing levels. So we kept our higher staffing levels even though we had a lower enrollment, because we felt like this was going to gain, and you can see where the gain is starting to happen. With things that were hanging out there, this probably didn't gain as fast as we'd like to, but we hope going into the next year we will gain those. But anything that we have to do to keep our preschool enrollment up and try and get to a 0 waiting list would be ideal. So this is kind of a good part. This count also is not part of our budget enrollment. It's a separate line for preschool. So this is additional revenue to the district for preschool.
Director Kleinger.
Does this include preschools that would be like, say, St. Paul Lutheran Church?
Yes.
And all of those preschools,
Yes.
not just Children's Village
Correct.
for us? And I think this is probably more a TJ question. Didn't we used to offer full day preschool? What made us move to half day?
We were financing that with our Title I budget, and so it really choked down the things that reading interventionists, things like that, inside of our Title I buildings. And so bringing that back, we still utilize quite a bit of Title I dollars to assist with spots. And so that's how we did it in the past. And I think we extended all the way down to birth to 3, utilizing that same thing as well.
Because the state doesn't reimburse us for full-time, only
Correct.
for half-time.
Correct. Yeah.
There's, in the full day programs, there's blending. We have Head Start funding. We have special education funding. We have ESSER funding. We have Title I funding. So there is, there's something else I'm not thinking of. Shared, maybe we don't have shared visions anymore, but there are a variety of funding sources that help make that 4-year-old, some of those 4-year-old classrooms full day. Most are half day, some are full day. But definitely the parents want the full day programming, and that's something that we've been advocating for every time we have ears in front of us from Des Moines, trying to share what a big difference maker that is, what a return on investment we get for our kids when at-risk students are able to be in preschool all day long.
Director Hayes and then Director Beck.
Do parents have the option of paying the difference for full day preschool?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a parent weekly, like they can write checks or bring other things in to help pay for wraparound care or full day versus half day care.
Okay. Now, Kevin, you had mentioned a waiting list. How many approximately do we have on that list now? And how do you feel that you wait for someone to move or something to slot a child in that spot, or how does that work?
I think it's a matter of case of available space. If I'm not sure if I'm speaking that correctly. Is that correct?
Right. The waiting list changes every day, but most recently, she was saying that the only ones that are currently waiting are 3s, which 3s, Gen Ed 3s are not funded. Even with parent pay, we can't really turn that around and make it work with teacher salaries. Or parents that only can do full day because they can't get their kid in the middle of the day. They don't have transportation. So those are considered still waiting list 4-year-olds that should be on this count. But we literally have no programming that can meet their family's needs right now.
Okay, but for the most part, our pre-Ks are all covered. These are primarily 3-year-olds that are waiting.
Yes, definitely. I mean, the number of 4s that are in that situation is probably less, or around 1 classroom of students. But we were able to add a classroom right after Labor Day because they had pulled, school started and people were like, oh, we need to sign up. And so we had 20 or 19 4-year-olds that were able to come in to the village. They converted a space into a classroom in the morning, and we were able to get all those kids in. So that was good.
Thank you. Director Beck.
So this is something that I've asked about before, and I appreciate all of the effort being put in to make preschool full day, because the families that need the statewide voluntary preschool typically are not always families that can pay full tuition for a full day. They need a full day of school. So as you said, anytime you have ears in front of you in Des Moines, you bring that up, which I think is super important. But is this one of those places where we can maybe find a public-private partnership or think outside the box to expand those opportunities by working with some of our community members who might be able to fund an endowed preschool classroom or something like that, make an investment that's going to last in perpetuity, or at least for the foreseeable future until we can convince people that this is a worthwhile investment?
So the thing that we really try and focus on is the things that we can sustain and control. And so we, in Davenport, have tried that same initiative, and eventually those dollars run up almost all the time. The endowed portion, that would be pretty interesting to put our grant manager on to think about. So, and I know that there are people in our community that are very passionate about that. We are really focusing on the things that are sustainable, and so as we move forward, that's really what we've got to build our program around, because when the dollars go away and ripping a program out, that's really hard on a community. It's hard on students, families, absolutely. So thank you for that question, and I will run that by Nikki. Let's see what kind of answer we get.
Well, also, when you get this enrollment going this direction, it's got to help with your enrollment going forward as you start going through the system. It'll help. They're in the system, so they're able to stay in the system and be comfortable where they're at, so that we keep our enrollment as high as possible.
So that brings up another question. I think I've heard in the past that by hosting some of our preschools in other buildings, like some of our parochial schools, that they end up poaching kids. It is what it is. If parents want to send their kids to a private school, that's fine. But right, so it's not necessarily a direct correlation.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Okay, on the next slide, we're going to jump into a little bit of special ed. This is a little more complicated. I'll lean on you a little bit. But anyway, I put a 3-year analysis of this. The first thing you need to understand is when we talk about special education, there's 2 counts. You'll see the number of students. That's our 1.0 count, and you'll see the additional weighting. Remember I said October 1 is a snapshot that we use? When we talk about special education, this year we looked at the special ed count as of October 29th. Now keep in mind that was Friday. I believe the justification is because when kids are getting settled and they're getting evaluated and their IEPs are getting updated, that we want to have as close to an accurate picture of our count and who we're serving and in what areas. Some enough?
Yes.
Okay, good. Again, I use the same assumption for FY23 for $7,393. So if you remember, Gary did a really good job about saying there isn't like a line on the budget that you can point to for special education, because it's a combination of the $1.0 that all kids generate. That is your 4th line on there. That is the per pupil amount times the students online, the first row. The second part is the additional weighting. You'll notice that our weighting has been declining. The one caveat I want to make is for FY23, that is a low number. That is not the number that it will end up with. Like I said, Friday was the count day. Any IEPs that are out there that are still waiting to get processed will get added. So that is a low number at this point in time. But I wanted to give you a flavor for what it looked like, and I believe that's about a week to 2 weeks old, because they're getting updated constantly. Again, and it'll be unaudited until the state sets that in stone.
Director Beck.
Quick question for anyone who might not know. When you're talking about special ed students, that's any kind of IEP whatsoever? Or are we talking about students who are in more supports versus less supports, or what?
So it's yes, sort of, to the answer to your question. So for one, it would include any student with a variety of supports. So I could have a very minimal level of services and I would be counted and weighted, versus I could have a significant level of services and be counted and weighting. My weighting is very different, whether it's a level 1 or a level 3, which then generates dollars. There are speech-only IEPs, which actually the AEA owns, and we do not get weighted dollars for those. So if I am a student that just receives services from a speech therapist, that's a 0 count. So an AEA does not get additional weighted dollars, but you do as an LEA.
So when we talk about the 1.0 revenue and the additional weighting, it's that combination that generates our total revenue. There's always going to be items like if we have tuitioned in kids or open enrolled kids that have an IEP, that we will be able to bill actual costs. If you remember, we were talking about we can only bill per pupil amount. If we have a student that needs a large amount of services, we'll be able to bill accordingly. So that's additional revenue that will get put in there. And on the flip side, when we have students that are attending another district, most of the time they're open enrolled, but they would still be if they have an IEP, it will still go through the special education tuition out, because they will be able to bill actual costs to us, but we bill actual costs to them. In all of this weighting, this is part of the funding flaw in the formula. Wherever this number lands will be what we get funded next year. If we had students, gen ed, special ed, doesn't matter. If we have students that come in during the year and we provide services and they leave before October of next year, we will never see funding on these kids. We still have to provide the services to these kids. Doesn't matter what level these kids are at. That is a bit of a flaw. And when we talk about special education deficit, we talk about any deficit, this can happen, and it can happen very quickly.
I don't know if it's really along these lines, but is our district equipped to facilitate almost all of the needs for the special ed kids that we have to fulfill their IEPs?
Yes, and so that your tuition out number was interesting. My guess is that there may be 1 or 2 special education students there. You guys have a full continuum of service, and so oftentimes you have districts that want to send their kids here to you because you have a service or programming that they are not able to offer because they're smaller. So they're likely foster students or something like that.
Or open enrolled, but they're still
Yep.
have an IEP.
Yep, correct.
Thank you. Any other questions?
And the last slide is any other questions. So
Director Beck?
If you had to summarize in like a couple sentences what we just saw, what would be a good way to summarize this for somebody who doesn't follow this closely?
I would say that our enrollment as a whole has stabilized. It's still declining, but it's stabilized, but our open enrollment out still has growth.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Oh, I did.
Oh, Director Beck?
Sorry, this came up at a policy planning meeting today. We were looking at a policy that the IASB labeled dual enrollment, but it was referring to people who are homeschooled but come to district extracurricular activities or maybe do a class here or there. And they use the term basic enrollment. Do you know what that means exactly?
I'm not sure the term when they said basic enrollment, but I do know that when we have, for example, a homeschool student that has, let's use that they want to be in marching band. It's very tough for a homeschool student to be in band if they're not part of a band. So we would get a very small FTE count for those kids when they're enrolled in band. I think basic enrollment is your 1.0 enrollment.
Okay, yeah.
So it's based off that number for contact hours.
Okay.
I always say classes, but I think it's more contact hours is a correct terminology.
Okay, so when homeschool students participate in programs in the district, we count them basically to the extent that they're participating.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for your presentation. We appreciate it. And thank you, Ms. Hoffman, for joining us at the big kids table. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you guys for your time and effort for those presentations. Tonight is a very transparent look at some of our data, and I know that it only strengthens the resolve of the team that we have here today. We're committed to improving those outcomes for students, and so just want to reiterate that to the school board. We have to continue to look at that data, continue to ask questions, and that's how we're going to continue to grow excellence in our district. So thank you, President Goza. That concludes our presentations for tonight.
What's your favorite time, Bruce?
So move.
Takeaways from tonight's meeting. I'll start with Director Hayes.
I've been really waiting to get these numbers. I think I must ask about that every week. What's the enrollment like, or the open enrollment like? And I'm pleased to see that it was so few. I thought it would be, in triple digits at least, but I'm happy that it was so low. Well, I was happy with the numbers were actually. With the math, I'm still confused on that. I didn't realize that we were in as bad shape as we were, and that's, pretty startling to me. So that's something that I'll probably ask a lot to see, if we're improving and what's going on with it, because that's kind of sad for a district this size.
Thank you, Director Snyder.
Yeah, for me, it's the math scores. And that's why I requested that information, and thank you to the administration for getting that to us. But again, it's evident that the impact that sitting in front of a computer monitor has had on our kids versus sitting in front of a teacher.
Thank you, Director Potts.
Yeah, I would just echo that. The math scores, we're going to need to address that. The process is in the works. I do think we also in that process we need to try to reconcile what student performance is in the classroom versus when they take a standardized test. There is a disconnect there. It's there, and we have the expectation. We appear to have the expectation that all kids are going to learn the same stuff at the same time. And that's just not, to me, that's not human nature. That's not how kids function.
Thank you, Director Klein-Jerome.
I definitely agree with Director Potts. They aren't all learning it at the same time, even though that's the expectation. And some are going to take longer, but there is also a sense of urgency that we get these math scores up, as much urgency as we have for the literacy. They have to know this. They cannot graduate from Davenport schools and not have math skills.
Thank you, Director Poston.
Well, I agree on as far as the math scores. It's pretty serious. But again, as was mentioned earlier, early literacy, they've got to read in order to be efficient or proficient at math after a while. But my other takeaway is open enrollment. Again, I think this is going to be a big concern, and I think as we work on our budget for next year, we've got to make some changes. And we keep talking about we need to put more money into these programs, and I agree, we need to put more money in these programs. But where are we going to get that money if we continue to have more students open enroll out of the district? And if we don't work at right-sizing the district, we do have a long-range plan, facility plan committee in place. But again, we need to do something now. We can't wait another 4, 5, 6 years. And so if we want to pay our teachers more, we want to pay our staff in the buildings more, we've got to right-size our district. And so again, maybe this doesn't tie in directly with what was discussed tonight, but it all goes back to the budget and our finances. And I am still very much concerned where we're at financially.
Thank you, Director Beck.
I pretty much echo what everybody else said. I am not happy with the math scores. Something needs to be done just as urgently as with our literacy scores. And as we've noted, they're tied very closely together. So I look forward to seeing progress in that area.
Thank you, Superintendent Schnecklow.
I echo a lot of the same sentiments that were said. And so the notion that a potential YouTube channel could be created out of COVID with their own teachers watching videos has been brought up by this board a lot. And that could really help during COVID. So that intrigued me, because our students love YouTube and they love watching videos. And if they're short, our community digests videos. Right, Catherine? They digest videos. She's teaching me how social media works, by the way. So that's one of my takeaways. But I do echo what everybody said.
My takeaway, obviously the lower percentage for the math scores and stuff, but I think it's a huge thing that we actually are very transparent about that and put that out there. And whereas in the past it would be presented differently, because you can make numbers say whatever you want, everyone knows that. But I like the fact that it's presented to us and then a game plan is put together. I'm huge on that, having your strengths and weaknesses so we can move forward from there. So I'm glad that when something gets presented to us now, there's a game plan put in place, and as well as we're reviewing it, and all of the staff and everyone else sees that we are doing this stuff, so they know how important it is to all of us, especially when all the board members express all their questions and opinions on things. So again, I appreciate getting real presentations. It's been quite nice, and real discussions and everything like that. And with that, Mr. Potts, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
I jumped the gun on you.